Hey, what's up? Hey, what's up? So, I'm recording this MacBook Pro review using the actual onboard MacBook Pro camera as well as the MacBook Pro microphone. That way you guys can see the quality of the microphone as well as the quality of the camera. Not the greatest, but I think it's passable. So what's my opinion about the MacBook Pro M2 of 2022? I think it's actually a fantastic value for a laptop, and here's why. A lot of YouTubers like to compare the MacBook Air M2 versus the MacBook Pro, and they want to point out the fact that the MacBook Air has a new shell, better screen, as well as MagSafe. Yeah, what they say is true, but they forgot to mention one very important factor. The MacBook Air M2 has a price increase of $200, while the MacBook Pro M2, the price remained the same, $1,300. In fact, I would argue that the MacBook Pro M2 is significantly cheaper than the MacBook Pro M1 back in 2020. Why is that? I mean, the price looked like it remained the same, so why would I say that the MacBook Pro M2 is a lot cheaper? Well, you guys gotta understand, we have a massive inflation this year. In fact, I checked Google and to see how much inflation we have. Compared to 2020, we actually has a 14% inflation. So what does that mean? It means that back then, if you have bought the MacBook Pro M1 processor for $1,300, it's actually equivalent of $1,500 of today's money. However, the MacBook Pro did not have a price increase, on top of the fact that for the past several months, it's actually on sale at Best Buy for $200 to $250 off. So what does that mean? It means that if you had buy the MacBook Pro M1 processor in 2020 for $1,300, if you were to compare that to today's money, you would have been spending at least $450 more for the M1 MacBook Pro compared to now, because now there's a $250 sale on top of the also $200 of inflations. So $200 of inflation money plus $250, that's $450. It means that right now you can buy a MacBook Pro with the latest M2 processor from Apple for $450 less than if you were to buy the M1 processor MacBook Pro 2 years ago. So really, I have no idea why you're complaining. I mean, it's a pretty good deal. And even the old form factor of MacBook Pro, it's still a pretty good laptop. The laptop has a nice fan. The screen is pretty good. I mean, I guess technically the MacBook Air M2 processor supposedly has a better screen with a billion color versus the 16 million color for the MacBook Pro M2. But when I was at Best Buy and I look at the laptop side comparison of high resolution pictures, I really can't see the difference. I mean, if you don't believe me, go to Best Buy and take a look at it yourself. Like literally next to each other, I saw at least like 10 pictures, and I'm like, dude, they both look the same. So the MacBook Pro M2, the MacBook Air M2 processor, the screen is actually only, well, it is a little bit bigger, so I'll give them that. But it's only technically better on paper, but in actual practice, it's pretty much the same. Since the screen is basically the same, the only big advantage of the MacBook Air has over the MacBook Pro is the MagSafe. The MagSafe is actually pretty good because it can actually fast charge. But the MacBook Pro M2, it has a fan which allows you to edit videos as well as like playing game a lot longer than the MacBook Air. And the fan also keeps the processor cool, which means that it's going to be more durable in the long run compared to the MacBook Air. And it also has a 10-core GPU, which it actually does benchmark a lot, I think like 20 or 30% more than the MacBook Air. Unless you wouldn't spend an extra $100 to get the MacBook Air, then in that instance, it's the same price as the MacBook Pro M2. So overall, if I have a choice, would I want like supposedly slightly better screen and MagSafe for an extra $200? No, not really. I'm pretty happy having spending only $1,100 for the MacBook Pro M2 processor, which actually overall, based on the sale price and the inflation, is almost $500 cheaper than if I were to buy the M1 MacBook Pro 2 years ago. So all those YouTubers keep on saying about how, oh, it's so pointless to buy the MacBook Pro M2. I'm like, dude, you're not really taking all factor into considerations. I think that with the $200 or $250 sale price for the MacBook Pro M2, it's a pretty damn good deal. Have you guys compared this to the Windows laptop? I mean, like if you look at the Microsoft Surface, right? There are a laptop that costs that's actually an 11 Gen i5 processor with 8 gig of RAM for $1,300. So that shitty laptop is $200 more expensive than the MacBook Pro M2 processor. Worse performance, worse battery life. This is actually almost $1,000 for a computer. You know, it edit video faster than an i9 processor, and 20-hour battery life. I mean, I have tested out the battery life for this. If I watch video or web surfing, it uses like an average of 5% battery life. So the battery life for this computer is excellent. I play like Civ 6 with it. It runs perfectly well. And although when I'm playing games, it actually drains about 20% per hour. But yeah, anyway, it is what it is. And edit video, it's blazing fast. I mean, this computer is blazing fast. Every app open in half a second. Not bad for $1,000 computer. No complaint here.